what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh.
Brothers in Tech is a weekly podcast focused on personal and home technology, helping provide you, our fellow brothers and sisters in tech, with some information, assistance, and recommendations. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Brothers in Tech. Boy, my voice is already going out even on the first syllable.
Wow.
Yeah, my voice is a little rough tonight and during this recording, so I apologize in advance. And for that reason, I'm not going to do as much talking as I normally do. So, Brian, why don't you?
Oh my gosh, our listenership is getting ready to go through the roof, right? What they've all been asking for you to take a back seat. Tonight is the night. Tonight is the night. Yeah.
So who are we, Brian? Why don't you
Well, welcome to Brothers in Tech. This is Brian Jackson, who is on the right side of your screen, if you're looking and watching the video, and my brother Alan on the other side of the screen, on the other side of the country, Alan Jackson. Alan, how are you doing? Do I even need to ask?
And before you ask, no, I'm not sick. I don't have any symptoms of anything. I honestly just lost my voice. And it's one of those things where, unfortunately, I lost my voice the other night. I've had to talk way too much still the last 3 days, which has not helped my voice at all. So it is still kind of shot. And today was another rough day of talking. So here we are. This is what you get here at the end of the day, Brian.
I mean, usually you would think if you've got a co-host, a brother that is very loving and thoughtful, would say, you know what, let's do this another night. But nope.
You said I'm not getting off the hook. We're doing this show.
We are doing this.
Alan, I question your commitment to what we do if you're going to skip out just because of a stupid sore throat. So anyway, I'm here begrudgingly. I guess I
mean, do we want to talk at all about how you lost your voice? I mean, was it a basketball game that went on recently that you were screaming and yelling at the screen? Maybe was that it?
There were, but that was not the incident that prompted this. But there were screaming going on around last night. There was a lot of screaming happening. I don't know if you could even hear it on the other side of the country.
Do you want to talk about the game last night? No.
Nope, I do not. Nope. I have already gotten my. I picked an enemy with someone here local who's also a University of Virginia fan, and I may have said some things tauntingly before the game, and I'm now reaping the benefits of that taunt. Well, actually, not benefits. I'm getting the downside of having taunted before the game. So yes, between ball games, maybe a night out a few nights ago that I shall not comment on, and just constant talking at work. Yeah, that's been the problem with my voice right now. So
yeah. Well, I would say there's some of that is deserved, and I will just leave it at that. And
thank you, Shane Flint, telling me to suck it up, Buttercup. All right. I'm here. I'm ready to do this.
Nice.
Bring it on. Let's do this show. What's a voice? What do I need a voice for? Let me just wear it out tonight.
Yeah.
I'll just not talk at all tomorrow. So
it's not like that's an important part of this gig. Well, Alan, let's let me take over for just a minute and tell the listeners what we're going to talk about tonight. Well, what I'm going to talk about, what you're going to kind of muzzle your way through.
Nod my head and listen. Yeah.
So one of the things that Alan and I tend to do about with his show is we're constantly asking each other, what are you doing right now in terms of tech? What's going on in your tech world? Do you have any new products that you're trying, or is there anything you're trying to solve at home? Or is there anything that that you need help with, which is rarely what we ask each other, because neither one of us wants to be told what to do. But so tonight is my night, where I'm bringing I guess we'll call it an issue that I was trying to solve in my home office. And specifically, I mean, maybe not calling it an issue, but an interest that I had and something that I was looking to get into. So, I spent the last few weeks trying to figure out what type of display setup I want in my home office. So move my office around. I don't know, Alan, if you can tell that I'm kind of have a slightly different orientation in the room now. And when I did that, I was like, I want to go ahead and kind of make some changes in terms of my computer setup as well. So let me just kind of back up and tell you what I have done. And Alan, you can kind of maybe chime in with what your setup is. But traditionally, I'm an external monitor person. So I love my laptop. I work on a laptop. But anytime I'm down at a desk, I would much prefer to have my computer plugged into a bigger monitor so that, I'm not hunched over the laptop. I prefer to have an external keyboard. I prefer to have an external mouse. Treat it like I'm on a desktop computer anytime that I can, because I know I can unplug and use the laptop. So I've traditionally had one single monitor, plug my laptop into it, and then use my laptop open as well as the monitor. And I think the previous monitor I had was a 24-inch flat monitor. It was nice. I enjoyed using it, but I got the itch to have a little bit more real estate. So that's kind of my setup, Alan. What before we get started with what I wanted to change, what's your setup?
I'm the same. If we're focusing on the whole monitors, displays that we use, I am a laptop user primarily as well. Laptop, I bring the same laptop home and work. Use it universally. It's the only computer I own and use. I'm very, very singular. But I'm like you in that when I'm here at my home office or at my office, I like having the monitor, external monitor. Yeah. So I have a can't remember if it's a 24 or 27 inch.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's a external monitor off to the side. I have it off to the side angle. I have the exact same monitor, the exact same angle, the exact same layout at my office. So that way, when I plug up my laptop to it the settings are identical.
Symmetry. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So the interesting. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but why is it that you choose to have the bigger monitor to the side?
I don't know.
The exact opposite is.
I don't know.
Okay. There's no.
No, I honestly don't. I've always just gotten used to having my laptop screen as my primary screen, and then my external monitors off the side. I'm always pushing spreadsheets over to it, or web pages I want to view bigger, or anything I'm looking to read, I'll throw up on this bigger screen. Yeah, I don't know why I've always kind of standardized on my laptop screen being the primary one in front of me that I work with primarily. I don't know. Maybe it's because I just got to get I might just be getting myself used to whenever I am mobile and portable and I don't have an external screen.
You're going to be working that
much more used to using the screen. So I don't know. It's a good question.
Do you use the keyboard and the mouse on the laptop, or do you have external devices?
It depends on if I'm here at my house or at the office. Here at my house, I don't have an external keyboard. I use the keyboard and mouse on the laptop. Space-wise, I don't have a very deep desk, and it just worked out better to have it here. At my office, I do have external keyboard and mouse I use because I have a much bigger desk and a separate keyboard tray for it. So
yeah. Well, so knowing our setups, which are fairly similar except kind of reversed, I'm a big fan of plugging my laptop in and using a different keyboard and using the monitor as my main screen, and then my laptop becomes my second screen. I do want people to know before we get too far into this that, if you haven't done this type of setup before, if you've always kind of used your laptop or just use a desktop, or maybe you have both and you want to combine the two, there is a lot of flexibility in doing this. If you, as Alan and I do, plug in a laptop that is then automatically connected to a monitor, maybe an external keyboard, maybe an external mouse. You can, there are settings to where you can get the computer to remember this setup that says, anytime I plug into this monitor, this is how I want it to be organized. I want this screen to be my main screen where my dock is or my start bar is, and this one to be a second, or I want them both to be mirrored. And it is nice that I don't remember that always being the case out. And a long time ago, when you would plug into a monitor, you'd always have to tell it, this is how I want things to happen, which was a nightmare for someone who, like me, in education that goes to different classrooms and plugs into those classrooms. It has to tell it each time, this is how I want to do it. But those days are no more. If you are looking to do this, you can set things up in pretty much any way that you want to set it up, and the computer will remember that setup for the most part. Does a pretty good job of remembering when you plug back in. Here's how the setup's going to be. So that's why I've fallen in love with having an external monitor, to know that it's not a hard setup. I plug in, and this is my desk working environment. So now here came my dilemma, right? I started to really get the itch, Alan, for more real estate, a larger screen. I find myself doing kind of having more windows open these days, different documents that I want to compare. And I started to, you and I talked about efficiency, right? And about using keyboard shortcuts and all of this. And I found myself doing an awful lot of switching between windows that were in front of each other. And I found that a lot of my day spent kind of flipping between windows. Okay, flip over to this document, flip over to this spreadsheet. And I just felt like I needed more real estate, or I wanted more real estate to be able to use. So let me walk you through my process here. First step was I went out and bought 2 monitors. I went out and bought two 27-inch monitors.
2 27-inch monitors. Nice.
It actually gave me a lot of real estate. And just for people, before we get into specs and things, when I give the size, we are talking about the distance from corner to corner, opposite corners. So that's 27 inches, at an angle. And I had 2 of those.
It's a little, the way that works is it's a little less width than 27, because again, the 27 is diagonal. So I know sometimes I've had people kind of get a little confused by that. They're measuring their space based on that 27-inch diagonal. It's like, well, no, you can't measure. The width is going to be a little more like 25. I think something may change. Yeah. So anyway, just it is a diagonal, corner to corner in your screen window.
Yeah. So and the reason I didn't feel like I needed that space, because I was going from a 24, which was a decent amount of space. I probably could have gone with 2 24s and been a big upgrade. But I bought used, so it was fairly inexpensive. And I said, if I'm going to do it, rather than being upset, in a year and wanting to have them a little bit more, I went ahead and did that. So I had 2 27-inch monitors. The same monitor came as a pair from that I purchased from someone. And I spent probably about 2 weeks with that setup. And let me tell you my frustrations. One was the monitor in front of me was great, right? The 27-inch was a little bigger than the 24 I had before. And I just found myself, Alan, probably only using about a third of the other screen that was off to the side. Now, you might be asking, well, why didn't you put them both directly in front of you? Well, I didn't want a bezel. I didn't want a bezel in front of me that I was always kind of having the document that's directly in front of me, having a bezel running through a line.
Well, and there's always the thing too with a computer. I mean, there is a screen that has to be kind of your primary interface screen, menu bar, dock, if you're using a Mac, or start bar typically appears on one screen you designate as kind of your primary. So that's another thing too, is if you have 2 screens like you had it, or like you were considering it as paired in front of you, you still got to pick the left or the right one as which one's your primary one for interface. Yeah.
And I think that, there was some software that I could have used to make, the dock, for example, go right in the middle across the bezel. But that again, that made no sense to me, right? It did not make sense. So what I ended up doing is having one of them directly in front of me, one to the side at an angle, to try to give myself kind of this, kind of cockpit environment where everything was fairly close to me. But I tell you what, Alan, having 27 in front, 27 to the side, for one, to actually use all 27 inches of that other monitor, that was a pretty big head turn that was having to happen. Yeah, sure. Right? That was not the peripheral vision that was able to see and do things. I was literally having to make my body turn to use it. And so I started realizing that even when I put my windows up there, I was never using the far right side of my second monitor. Okay. And so that got me a little concerned that, I've got all this real estate here, but yet I'm not really using it that effectively. So I went back to the drawing board, sold those monitors for $10 more than I bought them for, by the way, which was great, right? So that was nice.
That's a good deal.
Sold those and then started looking into a different setup, which would have been a larger screen, so I could have one screen to cover basically the real estate that I felt like I was using with those two screens, Alan. So what I started looking into was what's called the ultrawide monitors. Mm-hmm. And ultrawide is just a different orientation, a much wider monitor than what would normally be the case on a TV or a monitor setup. And there's all sorts of kind of sizes of those. I think 29 is considered an ultrawide monitor. I think 34 is considered one. And I ended up finding another used one, but a monitor that was a 35-inch ultrawide monitor. And
right, you said 35.
It's 35-inch ultrawide. And so, at some point I'm going to go through some. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask because I want to pull up a picture. Just because I like showing.
And I can share. I've got it here as well. If you want me to, I can.
Yeah, I just think for people not familiar with kind of the ultra wide, kind of what we're really talking about with that. So
yeah, let me share because I'll show you the exact one I have.
Okay.
And then we can talk a little bit more about some of the specs and needs here.
Oh,
okay.
That was exactly the one I did a Google search on and was getting
there you go.
An image for. What do you know?
Yeah. So this is a 35-inch LG ultra-wide monitor, and if you see just the image of it, you can see that's kind of long and skinny as compared to the orientation of the aspect orientation that would be on a normal computer. A normal computer monitor is going to be what, Alan, 16 by 9,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So 16 wide by 9 tall is the aspect, is the ratio that you have. And of course, if you get wider, that means you're also getting taller by that same ratio. This, however, is a 21 by 9.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so compare that to 16 by 9. All it did was add width, not height to what that monitor would have been. So as you can see with their the image that they're putting up here, it looks like all the dark part of that image is a normal monitor size. And then it's got extra monitor size over here that it's kind of putting a different window to display that. So in my mind, I was thinking, well, that's like having maybe more like this 27 or let's say maybe 24 plus that extra bit that I was using on the second monitor, right?
Well, you said before you were using like a full monitor and then maybe like a third.
Maybe a third of the other.
So that basically gives you that same equivalent of what you're actually using space-wise on a monitor. Yeah.
So now we got no bezel in the middle that I have to worry about. It's all on one screen. And then, the other question I had was this idea of flat versus curved. And for people that haven't kind of heard about those or even thought much about it, kind of a big thing that started happening with TVs, right, Alan, for a while was that the TV started getting curved. And it was to provide, because the TVs were getting so wide, that they wanted you to still be somewhat close to even the edges of the screen when you're looking at it straight ahead, as opposed to, if I had this big 35-inch monitor that was flat, well, if I'm in the middle of it, my distance to the monitor is, let's say, 20 inches. But my distance to the right side of the screen is going to be quite a bit more because it's way over there and it's flat, right? It carries on. So the idea is that some of these curved monitors means that you're kind of being enveloped a little bit by that extra width. And so my distance over here to the edges, arm's distance, it's almost arm's distance all the way across.
Yeah, it's trying to approximate a monitor that's all areas of it are similar distance from you. It's not exact. I mean,
it's not exact.
That would almost be like a semicircle, but it definitely gets it closer than a flat monitor does.
Yeah,
for sure.
And provides a little bit of a curve there. So there is pros and cons of that, which you can get into in just a minute. But that was also my decision, was like, do I want to go flat? Do I want to go curve? I initially thought flat because that's what I'm used to. And I figured that would be the case, but I ended up going with the curved again, partly because I found it used and it just happened to be kind of check all these boxes. So 35 ultra wide curved is what I ended up going with. And we can talk about other specs and things. So this idea of external monitor, Alan, to me, the first step was I had to decide what kind of real estate I wanted. How big do I need this to be? And I think for people that are looking to do this, if you've been dealing with a laptop only, and that has been your screen, if you go to a desk at home and you set your laptop down and you work on your laptop, then you'll probably find any of these monitors are going to be maybe a step up in terms of visual comfort in being able to see, especially if you have some vision issues that may be coming about. So a 24 inch is probably going to be great, and 27, 32, right? Those are the standard kind of widths that you'll see: 24, 27, 32. When you see something that's like a 29, 34, I think at 49, I believe is the super ultra wide. Is that what they call it? Yeah, super wide. Right. So that's, just imagine that being, quite a bit wider than what you're even seeing here on the screen. So those are the options to be thinking about it. And to me, I think it comes down to, do you find yourself using multiple windows at once? Do you find yourself needing multiple or a lot of real estate at once? And I just, the way I work, it's not that my work is necessarily different than others. It's just I like to have multiple things up that I'm pulling from, copy from this to paste to here, look at this compared to this, and
it's a little bit of the description of whether someone, and I know there's a lot of buzzwords around the idea of multitasking, whether that's even a real thing or not, but it's this idea of having multiple things available to you to either look at or view or work on. Some people are very singular,
right?
Meaning I work on one thing at a time. I'm going to have one window up at a time. And when I'm done with that, I close that off and then I'm going to open up something else. For those, I mean, I'm not going to say a larger monitor won't help somewhat, but it's not quite as essential as I think people like you and I that do need to have a lot of things open just to kind of stay active on it. So
I mean, if the type of work you're doing has lots of documents or lots of images, or you're someone who, if you're working on video and you've got something up but you want a previous version up as well. I mean, there's there are people that I think need, and the other piece being, if you're a visual person, if you're someone who works in images, works in video, bigger usually helps because you're able to see fine detail a little bit more that may approximate what other people are going to see when they put it on a big screen. So size was important, despite what I may tell myself a lot of times, size mattered, Alan. And so as I went into this world of how much real estate I needed, then it became the idea of, is it going to be ultra wide? Is it going to be, a normal wide versus super wide, all of that. And I kind of settled on this ultra wide, which I have to say I'm pretty happy with.
Okay. Well, that was going to be my question.
I was going to kind of leave that to the end, but now that I'm already getting to it, I'm super happy with the size that I have here. I feel like I don't mind turning my head a little bit to see all the real estate, but I don't feel like I'm having to crane my neck in order to see everything that's up there. And basically, I would tell someone, the way I look at it is an ultra wide allows me to put 3 document size things side by side pretty easily, right? I look at it as I can, instead of dividing a screen in half, I divide the screen into 3 parts. And if you like that idea of having 3 parts of a screen, I think the ultra wide is right. If you were someone who felt like they needed 4 parts, then I think that's where maybe this super wide comes into play. If you're someone that says, I just like to have 2 things side by side a lot, I think a normal wide monitor orientation makes sense, because this is exactly what I've been doing. Is I've had 3 things up continuously. Right now I've got our recording screen in the middle, I've got our notes on the left, and I've got my webpage on the right. And those are the 3 things that I'm, balancing right now and can kind of knock between the 2. Now, I have to say the other thing that, when you start looking at people's setups, I went and talked to several people that have different multiple monitor setups. And one, I think you and I talked about a little bit that, there are monitors now, or actually most monitors can be oriented vertically in the portrait mode instead of landscape. I don't suggest people doing that for one monitor, but if you're someone who's looking at dual monitors, that's one thought I had was, well, what about a 27-inch monitor or a 32, let's say, and then a smaller 24 that I could put vertical to the side, because maybe that would get me my real estate that I want. Vertical is what a lot of developers, I think, tend to use, what people that write code, because they like to see lots of lines vertically.
Well, there's that. There's programmers. There's also designers if they're working in page layout, meaning they're doing something in a standard page layout. You like to see the entire thing as large as possible. And if you put it on a widescreen monitor, you're just getting it, limited by the height of that widescreen monitor. You turn that monitor up on its side, vertical, you can go the full width, the full height of the screen with that page layout. So that's another reason I see people do it. I also see people using the vertical screens as, if you have a monitor that acts more as a dashboard of some sort, almost like you want to keep some widgets or other things, like maybe you got a stock ticker that you keep up on the screen. Maybe you've got a weather app you keep up, or other things, kind of treating it more like a side vertical window with just a lot of widgets and other things to kind of keep tabs on, but maybe not a working monitor as much. I've seen people use a vertical orientation for that a lot too.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing that made me think a little bit about a monitor that could be turned vertically was photography, right? And wanting to have, okay, I'm working on a landscape oriented picture. Oh, now I'm working on a portrait picture. It'd be nice to be able to turn that monitor on its stand, turn it, orient it, so I could actually get the full use of my monitor to be able to do that. So,
well, let's mention this, a couple things about this too, because this may be something that people hadn't really thought about or thought was really possible. Any monitor you buy can be turned vertical. It's up to the computer to tell it that you're wanting to display in a 90-degree rotation on that screen.
Right.
So, like, for example, the monitor I have right here next to me, my external monitor, if I have a mount on the back of it that allows me to turn it, then I can go into my computer and say, okay, that monitor off to the side is now 90-degree turned. There's an option for changing the orientation, so it will display everything in the right way. So you don't need it's not a special monitor you have to get. Any monitor can be turned on its side. It's the mounting that's going to be the key. You got to have, something on the back that allows you to put it in that vertical position, especially if you want to be able to switch it and go from landscape to vertical. Then you absolutely need a special swivel mount or a monitor that can accept one of those mounts.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. And I think that I mean, just going on that, not just side to side, you can, your computer can tell it to flip the orientation if you wanted to mount it to the ceiling upside down, right? There's ways of doing that, right? I've seen people that it's like, oh, I'm going to take the mount and put it, and of course that means the cords need to be going the other way. Okay, so let me get a little bit of structure here, Alan, because I've kind of gone a little bit all over the place about my process. But let's just say, so if I look at the decisions that I had to make, and the decisions I think are important for people to make when they're thinking about an external monitor. One is going to be the size, right? How much real estate do I feel like I need? By the way, also think about your desk, think about your location, think about, although wide and more real estate is great, it can dominate a desk. It can dominate a room. It can also become heavy. So, I got a little nervous about the weight of this, because I do eventually want to put this on a monitor arm so that I can actually move this out of the way and be able to do things, in that space and not have to, truly pick up this monitor and move it away. So you want to make sure that the larger you get, you also want to pay attention to the weight if you're going to eventually put it onto an arm or do something else with it. And then I think the orientation, right? That was kind of my big first step. How much real estate and what type of orientation? Do I want to go wide? Do I want to go multiple monitors? Do I want to go, 2 monitors, one that's vertical, one that's flat? Obviously we talked about where I wanted to go with this. The next step, I think, or the next category of this for me was, kind of the design of the thing. Do I, newer monitors tend to do just like TVs have, smaller and smaller bezels, right? So bezel being the the border around,
kind of the casing around the screen. So as you look at a monitor, how big is the border to the edge of the casing that it's in? That's the bezel. So
Yep. So obviously smaller looks cleaner. It looks nicer. But it also means that it's oftentimes a more expensive monitor if you're getting the same one with less bezel, because it's typically either newer or may have to some different technology to get that in there. For me, the stand was kind of important because I did want something that, I didn't really know when I got this, how high do I want it? How high is going to be correct with this ultra wide? I'd like to be able to move it a little bit. So for me, it was really important, Alan. And what amazed me is not how few. It amazed me how many monitors out there don't accept a VESA mount. So a VESA mount being the 4 screws in the back that allow you to mount it to something, either mount it to a wall or mount it to an arm. Those first 2 monitors I bought, the 227-inch, got them, loved them. They were super thin HP monitors. Got super excited about it, and just, I guess, assumed that they would have a VESA mount on them. They did not. Got them home. They loved them, and then I realized, oh, wait a minute, I can't put these on any sort of mount in the future. So that's an important piece. If you find that you want to eventually put them on some sort of mount, that's either on the wall or on an arm, to where you can move your monitor around and be able to clear out some desk space, you need to look for something that will accept a mount. A VESA mount, VESA, is typically kind of that standard for having that mount, right?
Yeah, and the VESA mounts do come in different, they call them patterns. Like, what are is it a 100 by 100 pattern? Is it a 400 by 400?
75 by 75. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that is basically the alignment of holes, screw positions for holes on the back of the monitor. And those have to align with whatever mount you're going to use. So if you want to get a mount, which I have one on my monitor here, it's important to make sure, yes, it is going to match your monitor, whatever the VESA pattern is for that monitor.
Right. Yeah. So that was a big thing. I had to kind of narrow my search to make sure that the monitor I found had that. Alan, I do want to talk a little bit about some of we already mentioned the curve, right? And unbeknownst to me, when I got into the curved environment, when I started looking into this, there are different levels of curve. I didn't realize that, right? I thought all curves would kind of be like, oh, it's a curved monitor, it's going to be the same type of curve. But we actually need to look at what the radius of the curve is. I think the numbers that you'll see, it'll be something like a 4,000 R. And what that actually means is that's the radius of a circle if this curve went fully around you. So, if you had a really tight curve, then that means that the smaller the radius means that would be a really, really aggressive curve, right? So if it was an 1800 R versus a 4000 R, those are the two numbers I saw a lot. 4000 R is a slight curve. 1800 R is a very aggressive curve.
Huh. Okay? See, seeing those numbers, I would have thought the opposite. So I'm glad you're mentioning this. So an 1800 is a more aggressive curve.
It's an aggressive curve. So and again, if you think about the curve, if the curve of the monitor is really aggressive and it continued all the way around you as a circle, it would be a really tight circle, right? So that means radius. That the radius of the circle or the diameter of it is really small. If it's a very casual or very kind of easy curve, that means that circle is going to be really big if it would carry around you.
It was my understanding there would be no geometry on this show.
Well, I didn't ask you, so I was just trying to give it to you, right? So I didn't quiz you on it, but I will quiz you later. So that'll come in. So notice the curve. Think about that, right? And I will say I'm super happy with the one I have, which is not that aggressive. I think it's maybe more on the 4,000 R order. But I notice it a little bit if you're sitting, that I can see things to the side a little bit clearer than I would have before. But it doesn't look so aggressive that, if you walked into the room, you'd know it right away. right? Just looking at the monitor, you'd have to kind of get a little closer to know that it had a curve. So to me, that was a better step into the curved world. Now, who would want a really aggressive curve, Alan? Like, have you seen people that have used those types of super kind of aggressive?
Well, and actually, I'm going to bring up, because I'm sorry, Brian, I'm a very visual person. I need to see.
Go ahead.
So I've got a image I'm going to bring up here. Yeah, so this is kind of showing.
Oh, there we go.
That size you're talking about.
Yeah.
So the 4000R is that top dotted line. For anybody listening on audio, basically it's showing a 4000R, 3000R, 1800R, and then down to 1000R, which is 1000 is the curviest of the curvy monitors.
Right.
While 4000, like the one you're talking about, is a slight, very, very slight curve.
Right.
Just enough to it. I think the reason why you would want that much 1000R, much harder curve on it, if you have a monitor that's going to be a little closer to you, given distance of space. Like, for example, I have a very narrow desk area here in my house.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that, okay, if I want to have a bigger screen, but I don't, my head is going to have to turn a lot more the less the curve, because I'm so close to the screen. You see what I'm saying?
Mm.
Having, even like you see in the picture, that monitor, the 1000R, is actually closer to the individual. And I kind of see that as a little bit of a, yes, I'm going to have to turn my head anyway, but at least this way, I'm kind of feel like I'm a little more surrounded by the things around me. It doesn't make as much sense if it's further away from you, further back in the desk, because then you're actually going to get some distortion. It's not going to feel like it's really around you. It's kind of, you're seeing a distorted image from a distance.
Well, and not that we need to think of any more geometry, but even if you look at that image, Alan, those four lines are all the same. They're the same width of monitor, right? So basically, if I had my 34-inch monitor that I'm a 35 that I have now, with a larger curve, the visual real estate is actually less, right? So it's going to take up less of my visual space because it's going to curve in a little closer. So I think that, either if you've got a really big monitor, I would assume, like if I had a 49-inch monitor, I would probably think that I'd have to have more of a curve, just because.
Because if you don't,
so far
you
over
are
there,
truly moving your head
from
one side to the other to see it.
Yeah. Yeah.
With a little bit of a deeper curve, you're still having to move your head, but it's not quite as dramatic.
Yeah.
The more the curve is. So,
But also I get with you, if you've got a small space, maybe that curve maybe actually helps you with space. So for example, if you had a certain width ahead of you, Alan, like I know you do, you only have a certain width to work with. You can't put a 49-inch monitor in that space you have, but you might be able to put something with more of a curve and get more real estate in that small space, right? The other thing I see is really big gamers are big into the curving monitors, because it's imagining you are taking your total visual space and you're actually in that environment. So you see the more aggressive curves a lot of times with gaming monitors and gamers.
The biggest thing I'd say, Brian, I'd recommend for anybody looking at a curved monitor is you just need to see it. Kind of in a demo, see it on display or something to get a sense of it, because it's really hard. I mean, I look at these lines, I look at these numbers, and I think, okay, well, I think I know what would work best for me, but I don't until I actually can see it.
Well, you realize there is some visual distortion that goes on, right? Because your brain is always used to looking at something like a flat page, right? I mean, that's the way we operate, right? We have things kind of that when we work on a computer, it tends to be a flat screen that we're used to. And now you're getting something where there's this slight bit of distortion where it almost looks like it's like a bow tie type look to me, when I see it. But I tell you, the ability to see the edges a little bit more effectively, it was really a benefit for me. And I was nervous actually of doing it, that if I went with this curved, I would feel as though that documents would look skewed, right? Because if I had documents up there and you got this curve going on, but I haven't recognized that. So anyway, that's something to keep in mind. If you're going to go curved, think about all curved is not the same, right? So you need to look at what level of curve. And then I totally agree with Alan. You need to see it. You need to actually be in front of it, because if you haven't dealt with one of these, it is different. And I read a lot of people online. They were like, "Oh gosh, I thought I wanted curved. I got it, hated it. Sent it back, went to flat." So to make sure
they got the wrong amount of curve, and they just didn't realize there were differences to it.
Their environment. Yeah. Yep. So, we talked about size. We talked about the aspect that we're using. We talked about the curve. We talked about some of the design of, the stand and being able to manipulate it. Then it got down to specs, Alan. And I have to say, I was not as educated about specs when I first got into this. That I just saw numbers and I thought, well, bigger is better, or more contrast is better, and all these different things. Higher numbers are better. But there really is some things that you need to at least be aware of, because as you can see, Alan, if you want to pull my screen back up here to what we were looking at a minute ago, if you just look at the title, look at the title of this thing, right? It is throwing so many specs at you in the title up there, right? Okay, it's HDR, it's VA, HDR, QHD, ultrawide. It's got the dimensions. It's got the refresh rate. It's got the 5 milliseconds. It's all these things that it's throwing at you. And of course, we get advertised all of this and say, well, obviously all those things are good, but you really need to understand kind of what they are. So Alan, I'd love to maybe just take this as an example, and let's just kind of pick apart a couple of these things. So one is where it says, curved monitor 3440 by
1440. Yeah.
So 3440 by 1440, Alan. So tell me a little bit about aspects, because you know more about this than I do.
Well, that is the amount of pixels available in the screen. So basically, It's saying that there are 3,440 pixels across the width of the screen, 1,440 pixels on a height level. Vertically. So it's kind of almost like you're calculating area on a space.
Yeah.
Obviously, the more pixels you have in a screen, the higher resolution things can be displayed on it natively. If you had, and we've talked about screen resolutions before, like talking about TVs and all that.
Yeah.
Same idea. It is the same idea. 1080p is 1080 pixels tall by 1920 pixels wide. So as you can see here, this is definitely wider than HD because it is a wide screen. The height is similar to HD, a little bit higher resolution than an HD typical HD TV screen. But that is what that pixel dimensions
width,
are.
Right?
Yeah, a lot more width.
Yeah, so. And this is where the 21 by 9 orientation comes in, as compared to if this was a 16 by 9 of the same quality, right? That first number would be a lot less.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, just as a word for warning, you may find some monitors out there that are super large real estate or super ultra wide, but they have a much lower pixel resolution. So the idea is that it's a less lower quality monitor. It doesn't have the resolution depth, even though it's filling up your screen with that same size monitor, right. But it's doing it with a lower resolution image. So you're going to see more fuzziness. You're going to see more blockiness. The more pixels that are in that screen, the sharper the image can be, the more clear, the more defined. And definitely if you're watching a movie, you put up a movie or a video on there, it's going to make full use of the resolution available to it. So,
yeah. And I think on that same note, maybe that's a good time for us to talk a little bit about that resolution is then going to also be dependent on the type of input that you're using, right? The type of connection you're making, right? So when I was looking at screens, the other thing was really important is obviously, most of them are going to be HDMI. They're going to allow HDMI connection, which we talked about before, that allows audio and video at from many of the current ones, right? 4K, 8K, depending on the cable, right?
Well, the cable and the HDMI spec, there's like there's an old version 1.0, there's a 2.1 now. So that's going to depend a little bit about, but HDMI is kind of the universal.
It's become the
standard right now. I think every monitor you buy nowadays has at least one HDMI input, if not multiple on it. And,
what drew me to this one, Alan, was that so this one has HDMI. It has two HDMIs, which is nice, but it has a a display port, right? Which is nice. That'll also be a different way of connecting, which a PC that I am using for work only has the display port option, does not have an HDMI on it. But then this one also had the USB-C connection.
Yeah.
Okay. And the USB-C was going to allow me, and this was the beauty, right? This particular monitor has a larger power supply. So if I connect my computer to it via USB-C, it actually will power my computer as well. So it becomes the dock as well. There are USB ports in the back, so I can plug my my keyboard, a mouse into the back of the monitor. I can also have sound plugged into the back of this monitor, and then now all I need is one cable going to the computer, which is the USB-C. So it kind of doubles as my laptop port, right? That I'm kind of setting up on. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't have the Ethernet connection, which is what I tend to use on my my dock that I have over here. But other than that,
I say if your whole goal is, if you're a laptop user and you are in the market for a new monitor and you don't mind spending maybe a little more for it, having that USB-C and having other ports on the back that
power capability. Yep.
Right. That's pretty nice because you could actually work yourself out of needing a docking station for your laptop.
So if you're talking about and simplicity was something I wanted on my desk. That's why I want to eventually put the monitor on an arm. I eventually want to put a microphone on an arm because I want more of my desk back to be able to have space rather than lots of cords. And so really I could walk up and there would be one cord that I would plug into my laptop, and I would already have my keyboard here and the mouse already ready to go. So that was nice. And not all of them have that. That's something you need to look into. Now, to do that, it needs a beefier power supply, because it's then powering your computer as well. So be aware that not all of those have that. Alan, the other thing that probably stands out here was refresh rate. I think
let's talk about that.
We want to talk about for a little bit.
Yeah, because I do think we need to talk about that a little bit.
So this one says 100 hertz refresh rate. Okay, and 100 hertz, which means 100 frames a second, right? That it's going to be delivering content to me at 100 frames a second. Now, up to, and I want to clarify this really quickly too, Ellen. And I did not realize this because you don't even really, you won't see it if you're looking at the specs. But to get that 100 frames a second on this particular monitor, I have to be using the USB-C. So HDMI would only go, I think, to 50 hertz. Even the display port, I think, was limiting what I could do. Now that's on a Mac. I don't know if that's the case on the PC, but there are different refresh rate possibilities depending on the connection that you have and the cables. Alan, is 100 hertz good?
Yeah, no, 100 is good. So just as a frame of reference, TV, like standard television we're watching, is 30 frames per second. More of it's going to 60 frames per second now. So we're seeing more and more content, 60 frames per second. At 60 frames per second, things look really smooth. They look real, close to realism is what you're kind of shooting for with that. You get to 100 and more, you are definitely looking at a very, very vivid image, because the more times it refreshes, the more times it's cycling and showing things on the screen, you get smoother motion, you get more realism motion.
More realistic.
If you watch a movie that shot over 100 frames per second, it gives you a very it just feels more tangible, more real. Then you don't feel like you're watching something.
It doesn't feel like a movie anymore, right? Because movies tend to live on this idea of almost like I don't want to say cloudy, right? But it's like a little bit more of you're in a different world as opposed to you're looking at the real world, right?
Films have traditionally been 24 frames per second, like actual motion picture movies you watch 24. So you're talking about 4 times more of the refresh rate, more times information per second being presented to you. Now, I will say this, for more standard users of computing, the high rate is not as critical.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
It's just not. I mean, the human eye, I think, can perceive some differences between 60 and 100 and 200. Slightly, there's a certain point where your human eye doesn't notice any difference. I don't remember what that number was. It was in the high 100s, I think.
Yeah.
The reason it's important for monitors more than anything is for people who game or gamers.
Exactly.
The reason is that you imagine if you are playing a game and it's so dependent on how responsive and quick it is. So, for example, if you push a button and you want to see the results of that button push on a game immediately, the faster the refresh means you feel like the monitor's interacting with you in real time as you're making these movements. If you have a slow refresh rate, you could be a fraction of a second off from doing something and it registering on your screen, which a fraction of a second may not sound like a lot, but for a high-end gamer, that is worlds different for them. So that's where that refresh rate really comes in and important and very handy for people who do a lot of gaming on their computer monitors. Yeah.
And actually the two numbers that are right there, the 100 hertz and then the 5 millisecond that follows it, those are the two things that gamers really need to probably care about, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're a gamer, if you're a high-end gamer, you actually want to be looking at something that's maybe 120 hertz or better, like 120 hertz. Some of them even are 240 hertz now. But if you're looking at high-end gaming, you're probably looking at 120 hertz or more, right? You'll see 144, some of these numbers that they'll put out. But you also want that millisecond number, which is it's going to be basically the response time of the input, right? So if you think about with gaming, right, there's two things going on if you want to game really well. You need that when the game sends something to the screen, that the screen recognizes it quickly, but it also then has a quick enough refresh rate that you see it quickly. So there's two things that are going on there. It's the
both
response time and it's the presentation of it, how quick it's presenting it.
You're right.
You want that. You want that millisecond to be under 10 for sure. If you're a gamer, if you're a high-end gamer, probably 5 down to 1, right? You want to be looking at between 1 and 5 if you're really high end. But for hertz, you're probably looking at maybe a 144 hertz gaming monitor. And you'll see those numbers be pushed up.
Yeah. And again, just think about it in terms of if something was happening on the screen, but there was even the slightest fraction of like that information not being refreshed and shown to you, and you're in a hair trigger gaming situation, that could make the difference. And then, like you said, the milliseconds, I push a button on my keyboard. It may register it with the game on my computer, but if that information takes a few milliseconds to get to my screen to show it, that's where there's a discernible gap. So both of those, they do play hand in hand. You got to have both of them really solid for solid gaming. Now, for you and I, we're not gamers, on our computers, and these two factors don't mean a lot to me, personally. I mean, I think as long as I felt like there's a 60 hertz refresh rate, I'm pretty good, because that's what I would typically watch maybe some television on if I wanted to see that same quality presentation of video on my screen. Sure. And yes, I mean, I don't want a really slow interface between my monitor and my computer, but any standard monitor these days is going to be adaptable and good for somebody using as a general computing device.
And just going back to that, when I mentioned that, my this monitor will only do the 100 at USB-C, right? Even when I'm connected with USB-C, I still go and turn it down to, I think, a 50 hertz is what I have it, because I figure, why do I need it working that hard? Because I don't notice the difference, right? If I was gaming, sure. But so those are the things that kind of stood out to me, that if this was a gaming monitor, yes, obviously that would be pretty important to have. For me, it was much more about size, the resolution, the aspect, and then also the connections, right? The connections were pretty important. Let me think. So what are some other things? Well, some other things to just keep in mind for people that are looking into these. There are different things like LCD versus LED versus QLED, right? Those are all different types of of the actual display itself, like it's the hardware of the display. This one you can see says VA. That's a type of LCD screen. I think there's what is it? VA, IPS, TN, right? All those are different things that describe the type of LCD. They all have different pros and cons to them.
Yeah, and some of it is branding by company name. Some of it, I think in general, and again, everybody can write me on this if they disagree, but I think again for general computing use, LCDs are going to be great and fine and work for you really well. Yeah. I do think if you anticipate using that computer monitor as more of a television monitor, like if you're planning on using it as a media to really watch things on a computer, you want to use your computer as like your media player and you're going to use this monitor to watch, then I think looking at more of the
maybe LED.
Other types, LEDs would be something
QLED.
Interesting to look at. Or OLED for sure.
Yeah.
But again, if you're talking working on the computer, web browsing, any productivity, any of that, I really think an LCD is going to do you just fine.
Well, and let me further that by saying you may actually not like having something that is a little bit brighter or crisper, because you got to remember how close we are to our computer monitors, right? You might say, well, that's fantastic. I want the thing that's the brightest and I want it backlit and I want it being able to pop and everything. But how close as you are, right? That's a lot of light going into the eyes. You may actually find yourself turning it down and never using the capabilities of that. Yeah. So I think that's where the LCD, it also has a little bit of a matte finish, which I think is also kind of important. You may see the reflective finish on a lot of it, and they seem super, super sharp. They're not as, they don't feel like they dull things as much. But you also got to keep in mind what's behind you. Do I have light behind me? Am I going to be reflecting things? Do I want, to have that reflective screen or not? So this, matte finish, but still be bright enough to really pop and have the information that I want to come about. This one seemed to fit a lot of the checklist that I had.
Yeah, if you are going to be primarily working on this monitor in a room with a lot of windows, and sunlight comes in, I'd really caution against any kind of like heavy reflective surface screen. It just, you may have curtains, you may have other ways to block it, but it's still going to show through and be distraction, I think. So
So look for something that has a little bit of anti-glare for a purpose.
Anti-glare, they call it matte finish.
So let me mention real quick, because you mentioned light. Another thing that I didn't really think a lot about until I started reading up about it was that the brightness of the screen. I always thought, okay, the brighter the screen, better, right? I mean, when I'm looking at TVs, I wanted something that would be bright and make sure that it's going to be crisp and not have a dull look to it. But brightness, again, you're close to a monitor. Brightness really comes into play if you have a brighter room. The brighter your room, the brighter your monitor needs to be to overcome that bright room, just like a TV would be. So, me, I have a fairly dark room because I tend to keep my blinds closed a lot. So brightness wasn't that important, but realize brightness is something that they will represent to you in what they call, what is it, Alan? Nits, NITS, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the number of nits means how bright those pixels can be. So you're looking at something like 300 nits or whatever. I think that's what this one is. And it's plenty bright for a monitor, plenty bright. So keep in mind that those are all the factors that you start looking at. You just don't want to get overloaded by these specs, right? They're going to throw lots of different things at you. The ones we've mentioned so far, the aspect, the size, the pixels, the potentially, if you're a gamer, the refresh rate and the response time. And then looking at some of the features that are going to be in there. If you're going to mount it, make sure it has a VESA arm or a VESA mount capability. If you are not, make sure the monitor arm itself or the mount or the stand is flexible enough to do what you want to do. Will it tilt? Will it turn? Do you actually have to lift this thing up? So those are some of the important pieces. But all that being said, I mean, there's, when it came back for me, it was really size and whether it wanted to be curved, and then whether or not it was going to handle.
It's really dimensions. Dimensions are really the biggest factor for you.
For me.
Not only the fact that it was a widescreen, but the size you got to go with it. I'll say this, Brian, and I know I work in a lot of field with video and other things more graphic oriented. So I should probably be more choosy about my monitor than I am. But I've got is an Asus IPS monitor. Their branded monitor I've had for several years. I've got the same exact model here as I do at my office. And it was a relatively inexpensive 24 or 27. I can't tell. I don't remember what size it is. And could not be happier. I mean, it's just it is.
Well, you could be happier, but you just don't know.
I could be a little happier. I mean, I am limited in my space here. I'm now. My hand is hitting the top of my desk area that I've got a shelf to work in. So I've got a monitor that is exactly the height that will fit in here right now. Yeah. So I couldn't really even go any bigger. I could go wider, but I definitely couldn't go any taller.
Yeah.
But it's just with monitors, it's most standard monitors from any good brand name manufacturer are going to have a good image for good general computing. The question just becomes is what size, what layout, and then if you have a more specialized use for that monitor. If you are a gamer, there's different factors to consider. If you are going to be doing any media content viewing on a regular basis on that monitor, you may have some other considerations to look at as well. So, yeah.
Well, I will say real quick, Alan, just on that, I think there are a lot of people that are upgrading their monitors. Mm-hmm. And so I certainly, if you're someone jumping into the monitor world, just like, hey, I want a second monitor and I don't want to spend a ton of money on it. There are people selling their old ones. And this is what this was. This was used. I bought it used. You can see up there, it says $619. I got it for $200 from somebody.
Oh, wow, really?
And it was still, I think it had only been in, he put it back in the box. So it's still in the box, still had everything, but had just been barely used. But you can find those just because I think the technology has grown in the last couple of years to where something 3 years ago, people are like, oh, I'm a gamer, I'm going to move to the new one. So they're selling their old one. You can find some of these, just kind of know what you're looking for, know about these features so that you don't buy it and get frustrated like I did, and realizing it didn't have a base amount and all of that was going to limit what I do. Alan, let me just quickly give you my pros and cons on this one because it's not all rosy about what I purchased here. Okay. Pros, the picture is gorgeous, right? I'm actually going to show you. Let me see. I've got a second camera here, Alan, because I wanted you to see the look here.
Yeah, let's go a little tighter, and I'm going to let you spotlight here.
Okay.
Wait a minute, hold on.
Okay. So there is my current setup. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you can see the size of the screen. This is a 14-inch. It's 14-inch MacBook Pro. Right? Yes, computer. Thank you. And then you can see this is my kind of 35-inch. That you can see you can see the curve. You'll see it a little bit more as I get higher, right? And then, of course, I've got an iPad over here that I was trying to use a little bit as an extended screen. But just, it's not a great image here, but you can see that I've got something in the middle of the screen, a window over to the right, window over to the left. And so for me, it was a great size to be able to have three things up that I was using, but not having to crane my head a lot. So here's I'm gonna stop this, but here's the things I like. I love the picture. I love the curve. I love the size that I chose. This was the right size for me. The stand that came with this one was pretty good in that I can lift it up and down pretty easily. It doesn't turn, which is a bummer, but it does have a base amount. So that's what I plan to do eventually. Here's the cons. So some of the features, so this is something I actually meant to talk a little bit about earlier, but Alan, I didn't realize this is the case, but with ultrawide monitors, one of the things that a lot of them are promoting, and of course, LG makes this one. Samsung is another one that I was looking at, had an ultrawide 34. They have something called split screen, and it's not necessarily split screen just like you're thinking, like, oh, I can split my screen and put one window on this side. It does have that feature, but what it's actually made to do, which is pretty slick, is that if I have a second computer plugged in, that I can say, oh, you know what, put that computer screen over here on this right third, and on the left 2/3 will be this other computer.
It uses
computer.
two inputs plugged into the back of the computer, whether it's, I guess it could be either a USB-C and or HDMI.
Yeah, actually, this is one of the things they don't tell you, or at least I couldn't find it too easily when I was doing research on it. One of them has to be an HDMI. So you can't do a USB-C and a display port. One has to be an HDMI.
Sure.
The other piece is that it just doesn't work on an M1 Mac.
Oh, really? Oh, no.
Yeah. That split screen piece does not work on the M1 Mac. It's supposed to, or it says it's supposed to. It should be an update that'll come.
Driver
eventually.
or firmware update or something.
I would assume so. There's a bunch of people upset. Of course, it's been about a year. This is LG, by the way. I don't know if Samsung got theirs worked out. But something that when Mac went to the latest operating system and was using their own architecture, that it was not supporting that split screen. So I'm a bit bummed about that. It does have, this one has built in, which is another feature you might look at if you're someone who wants to work on two computers. So it's great to have two computers, right? I've got a PC over here, I've got a Mac over here, and it'd be wonderful to have those screens up there. But that also means I've still got two keyboards and two mice and all of that. They do have a way of making it so that my mouse can actually go all the way to the other one. So that's part of the LG screen, is that it's called dual control. So I make sure both computers are on the same network, and then I can move my mouse all the way over, use the same keyboard for both, just like I would with an iPad. So that's pretty slick. That does work with this, but the split screen does not, which is kind of a bummer.
That is interesting. I would have hoped at least a year into the M1 Max, or they would have.
And again, I think it's an LG thing. I think it's an LG working with the Mac. I don't know if that's the case on all of them.
I mean, that's going to be that's going to be a good chunk of their buying base in the next couple of years. So,
right. Yeah. Last thing I'm not that happy about is some of the connections, and USB-C especially is slow to wake up sometimes. So if I were to leave it overnight and then come back in and wake up my computer, the screen doesn't automatically. Sometimes I'm having to unplug and plug back in, which is kind of a bummer. But I realize that maybe some settings, it may be that the display itself is going to sleep and all of that I'm trying to change some of those. But overall, it was the right decision on size and right decision on aspect for me. I just I wish that it had this split screen capability, because that would have been a game changer for me. Having
and it still could. I mean, I'm hopeful that that's going to be something they add in. Well, Brian, I was going to show you my office monitor layout. Okay. That's okay, just because I thought it's a little different than it's just a bit different than what I've got here. But I wanted to show you kind of what I work in every day and kind of the monitor setup I have. So this is it right here. And as you can see, I have 4 monitors. One above me, 3 around the side. No, they
look about like 40-inch monitors each, maybe, like 4 40-inch monitors. Yeah.
Now, even though that shows me playing a driving simulation, I do use this for Excel spreadsheets and other things too. No, in all seriousness, can I show you what I think is like the cleanest, like coolest looking monitor layout?
Please. I'm on my edge.
All right, so that's it.
There we go.
Now you can soak this in, Brian, because you're already 1/3 of the way there. Okay. You've got your ultra wide screen right there in the middle.
Which is the top. Yep.
You can see they've taken 2 monitors made vertical. Now, those 2 monitors that are vertical, those are standard size monitors. They're standard kind of traditional monitors, but they're both vertical. Yep. And they've got it. I love the arrangement where they're all lined up at the top, but the 2 verticals go down a little further down. Imagine what you could do in those 2 bottom wells of those two side screens. You could have the widgets down there. You could have things you're tracking or monitoring, and then you have a full width of the whole 3 screens to play with on a
that's beautiful
area. So anyway,
that's beautiful.
I mean, I like everything else with this layout too. So I'm kind of already getting some ideas for
the backlighting and everything. They did a nice job.
Yeah, it's a nice looking deal. But I love that. To me is the ideal perfect arrangement at some point in the future. If you're going to go 3 screens, but you don't, the whole, like you said, the whole idea of having 3 all across you, it's just a lot of real estate to catch up with.
It's a lot of turning of the vertical.
is a lot. I think a very natural way to work with it, and a nice layout to work with. So.
Yeah. And I would say, just looking at this, my guess is that middle one, it's an ultra wide, but it's smaller ultra. It's probably the 29, which is kind of the smallest ultra wide you can get.
Yeah.
Because, that's taking double the width of a keyboard, right?
Yeah.
But those side monitors, that's a really slick look. Yeah. No, it's nice.
Yeah, I love this look. So that's kind of this is my aspiration board.
There you
this
go.
Is my what do I do? What Pinterest do you do this on? You put your
you go
board
and pin it. Sure. Yeah.
Your vision board. That's it. This is on my vision board. This nice. Layout. So yeah.
Well, let me kind of wrap up maybe my dive into the external monitors and say there are some cool options out there. I would suggest people really think about the way they want to work and think about what they like to do when they work. Do they like to have lots of things open? Do they like to, are you against turning your head? Do you want things bothering you? I mean, one of the things I was just recognizing as we were talking, notifications in an Apple environment come up in the top right. Okay. I mean, that's one of the nice parts is when I'm doing this, it's so far over there that it doesn't really bother me that much, right? A lot of times if I'm on a laptop, that's kind of popping in and going, oh, well, but
aren't notifications supposed to bother you? I mean, that's the thing is that you could see.
I want to see them, but I don't necessarily, if I'm engaged in something, maybe that's where the focus feature comes on and all of that. But there are some things you need to consider, right? How much real estate do I actually want? And what can I handle? If you're someone coming from a laptop, and if you're coming from let's say a really nice Apple laptop, no screen that you're going to get is going to look quite as nice as your Apple laptop screen. Those things are incredibly high end. So,
and that you bring up something else I wanted to mention. I was going to mention earlier. This may seem like so obvious, but I guarantee you, it's not. Somebody's going to trip up on this. What Brian showed you, his setup. I mean, the difference between mine and his. I have my Mac laptop as my main monitor right here in front of me. I have the webcam built into the laptop right here in front of me.
Right.
Brian's screen, because he's using an external monitor as his primary monitor, has to have a extra webcam off there. So just a little caveat. I have actually seen somebody buy a monitor and hook it all up and be all excited to be able to use it with their laptop and then realize, oh, wait.
I have to turn over here.
My laptop's over here, I'm now turning my head to the camera all the time. Unless I get another device, an external camera to go on it. So just something to remember with that. Yeah.
No, it's a good point. I mean, for me, that was another beauty of having the USB port in the back of this, because the two things I have plugged in is a keyboard and a webcam, so that I don't have to replug those in, or I don't have to have them kind of the cord showing elsewhere. Yeah. But no, you're right. That has actually been a challenge when I go to work, which I also have a external monitor at work, but I don't have a separate webcam. Mm-hmm. So when I go there, I'm working, and then when I'm doing a Zoom call, I feel like I'm having to hunch over here to the side. So you're right. That's a consideration. But so there's lots of variables, lots of things to consider. I do think it can be a really helpful move for some people if you are at a desk and you have the real estate to do it. I think you can get some more work done if you've got a little bit more real estate to have things up. If you think about you switching apps all the time or switching what's in front to work on something a lot, then that's why I think, Alan, that's why I struggle with an iPad. Is one of the main reasons I struggle with an iPad. I mean, I know they have split screen now and all that, but the real estate itself, I find myself having to switch back and forth so often. And when I'm on a bigger screen, it allows me to put those things all up there and not have to, go back and forth. They're all up there to view. So, so keep that in mind. And I certainly would love to hear from some people who have other thoughts of this or have some different setups that either we can drool at or would make a little jealous. So
I would love to do this. I would love to have people send us their setups if they feel like they've got a really cool monitor arrangement or even just computer arrangement on their desk. I think I'm always fascinated to see other people's layouts of how they've positioned not just monitors, but their computer and peripherals. And It'd be fun to see. So I challenge anybody to take a snapshot of your desk setup if you think you got something cool going on or something you want to share, and we'd love to see it and show it.
Oh, you want to see a picture? Okay, I thought you meant send us your setup so that we can have it.
Well,
donate it to the
we'd
show.
like to test your
Yeah.
whole setup out.
Right.
So ship it to us. Separate packages are fine. We'll put it together, and we may keep it for I don't know, a few months, and we'll eventually send it back, or just send us a photo if that's easier.
Yeah,
quicker
okay.
to do. Send us a
Send
photo.
us a photo.
I do, Brian. Sometimes I will just look up people's computer setup on their desk and just see how people have it laid out, just trying to get ideas and inspiration. So
There you go.
fun. That's very fun. So
All right.
for the record, ladies and gentlemen, Brian Jackson just talked for a little over an hour about monitors. And so it was that was good. I mean, it was
a
a really
little
good
bit more
talk.
exciting than backup, but
Not really.
I did my best.
Not
I did my
really.
best.
It was all right. No, it was good. It was a good talk. I think
All right. Well,
there's enough happening in the monitor space right now that was worth discussing a
I
lot of these
agree.
options. So it was good.
I agree.
Great. So Brian, I know we'll get together again next time. I think it's about time for another Brothers in Tech Suggestions
I
episode.
think so.
It's been a little while on that.
I
We
think
may
so.
be doing that next week we get together. But in the meantime, if somebody either wants to send us their monitor setup or suggestions, or just has any questions or other comments for us, what should they do at this point?
Yeah, email us. Email us at info@themesh.tv. And as Alan said, send us those pictures, brag to us a little bit about your setup so that we can pin it to our to-do list. And or you can go to our website at www.brothers-in-tech. That's www.brothers-in-tech.com. So you can see previous episodes and also connect to us through there.
Perfect. Well,
All right.
thank you so much for everybody for watching and listening to Brian talk for the last hour, and me just sit and just kind of
Swear that's going to be the most listened episode we have. There'll be people that actually make it all the way through our episode this time, Alan. So I think.
All right, you got me choked up on that.
All right, Alan, that was fun.
Yeah.
I hope you feel better,
Listen,
man. Yeah, I hope
thanks
that
everybody
feels
for
better.
watching. Yep, I'm gonna go home, rest my voice now. So thanks everybody for watching
Perfect.
or listening, and we will look forward to talking to everybody next time. Take care.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.